my name is Elissa Yancey. I have taught journalism at the University of Cincinnati for 8 years now, and my current title is Director of Media and Communications for the Office of the Provost. I have spent the last 25 years working as a journalist and storyteller, first in mostly magazine journalism and then in online journalism through the 90s, and really started doing multimedia storytelling in the mid-2000s when all of the different tools started to become available for journalists who used to be confined by a certain number of column inches in either a newspaper or a magazine. Well, the interesting thing about multimedia to me and the growth of my career is it's been an oddly natural extension because when I first started out I was a newspaper reporter, but I always felt confined by the space in a newspaper. So then I became a magazine reporter because there was more space and more opportunity to tell deeper, richer stories. So then multimedia added to that allows for even more layers and more elements to stories that we can add into stories now that we never could do before. So for me, adding multimedia became a great extension of the practices of good journalism that I had been striving to achieve for more than a decade at the time I started. I started off doing audio slideshows. I had always loved taking photos, but then started studying the work of some photojournalists and really thinking about how to frame shots and how pictures can be used differently than words to tell different elements of a story. And I think I first went down just to Findlay Market and collected the sights and the sounds of the people there, the people that work there, the community that honors that place every day and every week. And I really found that I enjoyed it. I sought some specialized training from different institutes around the country. I went to the Poynter Institute in Florida. I went to Stony Brook University. I've gone to different multimedia workshops, and then, like most things in journalism, when you really learn it is by doing it over and over again. So I have tried my best to keep up with new trends and really think about how different types of media can be used to tell different elements of stories that sometimes words aren't the best way to get personalities across or ideas across. So I talk a lot in classes that I teach about the value of photographs, the value of video, the value of data, like data visualization, and how all of those different elements can be used to complement and supplement what a good narrative can do. So I worked for about 9 months on a story package about the neighborhood of Lower Price Hill a decade after a very devastating industrial fire had really changed the landscape of the neighborhood. So in doing that reporting, I did a lot of data reporting, which was really fascinating for me. So I looked at health data, I looked at and talked with an expert graphics guy about how to communicate the data that we found about health outcomes and the incidence rates of different cancers and the causes of death in the radius around where that fire happened, which was really fascinating. So there was the whole graphic element to the story. I got to sit down with a couple of the key sources and do just sort of ongoing videos of them answering some key questions about the work they had done in the neighborhood, the changes they had seen, and the impact they knew had happened because of the environmental fragility of this particular low-income neighborhood. And then the other piece that was great was, even though I had done video and audio of one of my key sources, the video wasn't great. It just wasn't good. So I was able to pull out pieces of her audio that I had recorded that was great and just pull out like 30-second audio bits that really emphasized key points of her interview that I just loved being able to tell part of the story, then insert the audio because it was all online, all digital, that then made it more impactful because you could hear her saying, we heard a pop, 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 and we knew, that those were all barrels full of toxic chemicals that were exploding, and it was right across the street from my house. I mean, I can write that. There's nothing like hearing her say that and the emotion that was in her voice. And I almost think that if you had seen her saying it, it would have been distracting from that emotion that was still 10 years later so palpable in everything that she was saying. So that is by far the piece I'm proudest of. I worked with a very big team. My piece included text, data visualization, audio, and video, and then 2 other reporters tackled different pieces of the same bigger story. So it was a bigger story package, but I was very proud of the pieces that I was able to produce using those different types of media to emphasize different elements of the story. As a tip, one of the things that I've learned through multimedia reporting is that it's very different from reporting for print. When you're out gathering different types of media, you have to think very differently about your sources, about your own role in the reporting, and that's been a real challenge and is an ongoing challenge, I think, for anyone who did not start off as a multimedia reporter. I say and yes and a lot when I'm interviewing people, and editing that out is not always fun. I have come to believe that when you go out as a multimedia reporter, you have to be very intentional about every element of what you're doing. So I think to do it well, especially if you're doing it on your own, is really, really challenging. For myself, when I go out to report on a story, let me think about this, a good way to say this. Because honestly, yesterday I spent like 4 hours yesterday interviewing a source. I went to church with her. I hung out at her house before and after the church service because I'm working on a project about poverty and about this woman who is symbolic of how the power of the human spirit can really shift some ways that people think about what it means to live in poverty. So she's incredible. But every time I go report on her, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to get audio, I have to get video, I have to get images, and all I really want to do is sit there and soak up the surroundings and feel the feeling of what it's like to be in her life and feel like fully engaged in a conversation with her dad or her son or her daughter or her this woman who's one of her friends who she picked up to take to church, who has 14 kids. She's my age and she has 14 kids. She's 49, 14 kids, had brain surgery, lost her memory for 3 years, was homeless, and then, so she's telling me this story in the back of a car that we're driving to this church service, and my source is in the front seat encouraging her, like reminding her different pieces of her story to say, and I'm thinking, how do I multimedia report this? This is crazy. I just want to I can't even write notes down. So in that case, I just turned on my iPhone recorder. So at least I have audio from that. I have no idea what it sounds like yet, but I think it's really challenging to try to balance all of the different elements in reporting now. I think when reporters go out and have different recording tools like audio recorders and video cameras, it's really important to still establish the relationship and the trust with sources beforehand, because the media can often be a barrier. I remember when I first started reporting, there was a big debate over whether or not ever to use audio recorders when you were interviewing people, because people might not trust you if there was this piece of technology between you. So now add cameras, add more sophisticated audio recorders, and even though sources are, I believe now, much more sophisticated and used to seeing people in multiple media formats, it's still a really hard thing to feel comfortable on camera, to feel natural, to feel like you can have a conversation with someone when all this equipment is between you. So I think the relationships are as important, if not more important than ever, to have with your sources to make them comfortable around all the additional pieces that you have. So I think that means spending time really without the materials and the equipment first. And then once you have people's trust, once they understand who you are and that you're not in there to be exploitative, that you're actually paying attention to them, I think then it's a lot more fruitful, especially if you're working as a solo journalist, to get the kind of media footage, the media that will really be valuable in the stories that you can tell. The solution is to always have a partner, which is great, and I think highly beneficial, especially when you do any video work. It's super hard to do the recording, the audio, the video, and ask questions and be present in the moment. I almost think you have to be some kind of superhuman to make that happen, and I think something always is going to suffer. So if you can always have someone who is more focused on the relationship and really talking to the person, I think you'll always get something more authentic and more meaningful. So always take a partner if you can, and otherwise just understand that mistakes are going to happen, and collect a lot of footage, more than you ever think you're going to need. I think my mantra is B-roll, 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 because every time you think you have enough B-roll, you don't. And sometimes it seems ridiculous to hold a shot for 10 seconds until you start editing. And then you realize, ooh, that's moving too quickly. And I learned a lot from some TV producers early on in my multimedia experiences, where there were the 10 commandments of video. And I think always remembering things like ambient sound, always remembering things like it's okay to ask people to repeat themselves on camera, not to manipulate what they have to say, but just to clarify things. I think those kinds of experiences that you have reporting in the field inform the next stories that you tell. So practice, practice, practice. Practice with your friends, practice for fun, practice editing all you can, because editing is, I believe, another creative art. And I think that if you enjoy it, I think a lot of journalists really do enjoy sort of that power of editing video and audio, to really just take the time to do it well. The other thing I would say that I see a lot in student multimedia projects is it sounds like a don't, right? But it is a don't always think background music can solve your problem, because sometimes it's just like this very loud soundtrack in the background. It almost drowns out the voices because they don't have good audio. You're not fooling anyone. Audio is so important, and audio is, I think in video, I would say the most important thing is audio, because if you don't have that person's voice, if you're not capturing it, it's so distracting that whatever you've captured visually is just not going to make the impression. But, the loud click, 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 or the big, rustling noise that you hear in the background, that's going to be what people remember. So audio is queen, king, ruler of all. And I think, again, getting enough B-roll, getting a lot of different types of shots, different angles, just so you have enough material to play with when you go back to compose your story. One other thing I would say is that when I talked about how it's important to know your sources and talk to them before you collect media, one of the benefits of that is then when you go back with your media equipment, you're intentional about it. So you may storyboard then after you talk to somebody, and then you can go back and get the kind of media that you want to make that story happen. So then you'll be like, oh, I want to make sure I get that person talking about this thing that we talked about before. Oh, I want to make sure I get footage of this thing, this person doing this thing, or in this place that they talked about. Or I can go out and get B-roll of this